Maybe it was the fact that I had to wait all day to see this episode, or that quick notifications and reactions throughout the day from other fans kept increasing my excitement for the finale, but I came into this episode with high expectations, which is something that I normally try to steer away from, to avoid any disappointments. Despite these high expectations, this episode completely blew me away. It had everything I've been looking for in the series. While there wasn't a specific piece of music that stood out to me, it was all noticeably better throughout this episode, and helped enhance every scene, whether it be the duel between Obi-Wan and Vader, or a short talk with Roken. There isn't much to talk about with Roken in the path, but Roken's short dialogue with Obi-Wan where he realized Obi-Wan's personal motive for facing Vader quickly turned a character that had been mostly in the background for me into one that I would very much like to see in the future. I never latched on to him in previous episodes, but his short scenes here made me connect with the character in a way that I could have never foreseen. Haja also only had a few scenes here and there, but I've loved seeing his character develop throughout the series. I'm glad that there wasn't too much of a focus on the path in this episode, as that was a story that didn't need to get wrapped up in the series, but I think it's very likely that we see them again, possibly in Andor later this year, and I would gladly see it happen. We already know that the upcoming series will follow the birth of the rebellion, so it would be neat to tie the two series together and have Andor show the path grow and shift into the Rebel Alliance that we see in Rogue One. To wrap up my overall thoughts of this episode, I know that I've expressed my concern over the appearance of certain backgrounds when the volume was used, but I thought everything looked fantastic visually in this episode. I never found myself drawn out of a moment, and even when I was fairly sure that the volume was being used, like in Darth Vader's castle or on Alderaan at the end, I had to second guess myself, and to be honest, I'm still not sure, which is a sign that they did a good job blending the two forms of shooting together. I came into this series not looking for much. While I was excited to see Obi-Wan return, I wasn't like the other fans who had been clamoring for years to tell this story. But after watching this finale, I'm so glad they did. Obi-Wan's journey has been incredible to watch, and the writers did such a good job of incorporating themes throughout his story to the point where this is what I'm watching for and breaking down every week, something that I think the previous live-action shows have struggled with a bit. The other shows have had the themes, but it's always been pushed to the side for whatever story is being told. In Obi-Wan Kenobi, it's always felt like the story and the theme of moving on from the past and becoming the hero once again have been intertwined. We began the series with Obi-Wan unwilling to help anyone, using Luke as an excuse to stay hidden on Tatooine forever. But eventually he's forced to leave to save Leia, and his journey from saving Leia to finding the path opened his eyes to the rest of the galaxy again. He had refused to look for Leia in the beginning because of Luke's importance, but after spending the time with Leia, Obi-Wan has realized just how special and important Leia is as well, to the point where he is willing to risk everything to rescue Leia from the Fortress Inquisitorius. After becoming a part of the path, per se, Obi-Wan begins to act like a Jedi again, surrendering himself to save the larger whole. And in this episode he did it again, facing Vader alone on a foreign planet, partially to allow the others to escape, but also for a personal reason. As the series has progressed, we've seen Obi-Wan return to the Jedi Master that we knew in Revenge of the Sith, and with it, his strength returns. But this time, it's Luke and Leia that he's fighting for, not the Republic or the Jedi, but two children. And finally, at the end of it all, Obi-Wan moves out of his cave, and most likely into his hut that we see in A New Hope, symbolizing his new hopeful spirit. After his encounter with Vader, his failures on Mustafar no longer keep him locked in a cave. He's moved on and has looked at the future, where Luke, Leia, and the Path will all oppose the Empire in their own ways. Even though I had been hoping for Qui-Gon to appear as a Force ghost since this series began, when he finally did, it felt like a cherry on top. I was having so much fun with the episode that I completely forgot about Qui-Gon, and probably wouldn't have minded if he never appeared. I did like his exchange with Obi-Wan though, because it adds more to his journey throughout the series. Obi-Wan had cut himself off from the Force and gone into hiding on a remote desert planet, refusing to help anyone who came through. So of course Qui-Gon wouldn't appear to him at this point. But after opening himself back up to the Force and the galaxy as a whole, Qui-Gon believes that he is finally ready to see him. And of course it was great seeing Liam Neeson return again. I'll get this one out of the way quick so that I can move on. As much of a pleasant surprise that seeing Sidious show up as a hologram was, something about it looked off to me. He sounded normal, or as normal as the Sith Lord can sound, but visually he looked very still and emotionless, more than usual. That may just be because we've rarely seen him in a hologram form, but it was a bit disappointing to see him and not get the complete feeling of evil that comes when Sidious appears. I've expressed my love for Vader in this series multiple times already, and it only got better in this episode. Shifting his focus from the members of the Path to Kenobi all alone is completely something that he would do, and he even went down to the planet's surface alone to face him. Everything about this duel was personal, for both Obi-Wan and Vader, and it was well worth the wait. We saw a brief duel in Episode 3, but Obi-Wan had just begun to tap into the Force again, and it was a one-sided battle with Vader dominating with every blow. This duel had each of them throwing blows back and forth, and it quickly became one of my favorite moments from this series. Obi-Wan began with his iconic pose, and my excitement never dipped for the rest of the battle. Vader felt completely dominant in the beginning, even with Obi-Wan landing a few hits here or there. It took everything Obi-Wan had to keep up, and it ultimately left him in a pile of rubble. I didn't realize the exact details of the scene until rewatching it, but the entire scene of Obi-Wan being buried in rocks was a very special and distinct part of the duel. It slowed everything down for a while, leaving room for a second act to hit even harder. But I loved the overlay of the voices from his past. Obi-Wan was using the Force to keep himself from being crushed, but as the voices of his past continue to haunt him, including everything that happened with Anakin on Mustafar, he weakens and the rocks become heavier. But then he sees what the future holds for the galaxy, and how Luke and Leia, while young now, will be what restores hope, giving Obi-Wan the strength to free himself and return to battle even stronger. It's at this point that everything goes downhill for Vader. Obi-Wan comes back as strong as ever, and the rest of the battle was very reminiscent of the Battle of Heroes on Mustafar, with two of the most powerful Force users trading blows in battle that was a blast to watch. It was never only about the lightsabers or the Force, but an enjoyable blend of both. Obi-Wan's scene of lifting rocks showed just how far he's come, but it may also have been a nice callback to Luke's teachings in The Last Jedi about the Force and lifting rocks. The rest of the battle plays out, and it was all fun to watch, but it was the final dialogue that finally broke me. Obi-Wan slashes Vader's helmet, very similar to Ahsoka and Vader's duel on Malachor in Star Wars Rebels, and as soon as the distorted audio mixing Anakin and Vader came out, I was a lost cause. It was done in such a good way, and the conversation between Obi-Wan and Vader finally made me feel the emotions that I've been wanting from the series. This scene was absolutely heartbreaking, and the acting on both sides was incredible. The lighting from the lightsabers also stood out to me, and it was a good way to make their facial expressions visible without having to brighten the entire landscape. I could talk about this scene forever, but the emotion in small moments like this in a duel is what separates the good from the great for me, and this is definitely one that I will not forget anytime soon. I'll admit that I wasn't completely on board with Riva's side of the story in this episode, at least until a second viewing of it. Part of that had to do with the fact that I could barely see the screen because of the Tatooine night, but that's on me for being in poor lighting conditions when watching the episode. I think for the most part it had to do with the drastic change in emotional tension, as well as my investment in the story. The pacing was very similar in both concurrent stories, but my emotional investment with a duel between Obi-Wan and Vader is very different from Riva fighting Owen and Beru. However, a second viewing of the episode really helped me come around on this side of the story. It's a nice conclusion to Riva's story, but it also leaves room for her to lead a new life in the rumored series set around Riva. It felt very sudden to begin with her on Tatooine looking for Owen, not showing how she was able to get off of Jabin so quickly, but that's something that I can easily fill in with my headcanon, like how the Empire might have just left her shuttle there. Something that really annoyed me on my first viewing was how Owen and Beru were able to mostly hold their own in a fight with an Inquisitor, and why Riva wanted to kill Luke in the first place. But at this point I've either found an explanation or I've come to peace with the story that they told. Riva is coming off of a stab wound, so it makes sense that she would be slightly disheveled and unfocused during battle, not using the Force to her full ability. As for her motive, I'm still pretty confused on how much she knew about Luke. I don't think that she knows that Luke is Anakin's biological son, nor do I want it to be so, but her line to Owen about him loving Luke like he's his own made me question it for a short while. However, Riva knowing is the only reason that makes sense to me why she would want to kill Luke specifically. If she is unable to get to Vader, she might as well go for his son. She learned from the broken hologram from Bail of Luke's importance, but killing Luke at that point would seem more like revenge against Obi-Wan or a target to unleash her anger rather than a coordinated attack against Vader. I don't know, at this point I'm just spitballing. I really don't want anyone else, especially a former Inquisitor, to know about Luke's importance, and it doesn't make sense to me that Obi-Wan would just let her walk away with the knowledge either. Whether or not we get an official answer to that doesn't really matter to me. It's something small enough in the grand scheme of Star Wars that I can just push to the back of my mind for now. Riva'S moment with Obi-Wan at the end did help me refocus after having all of these questions from the earlier scenes. Like I mentioned before, the writers of this series did a very good job of incorporating different themes into the story and characters, and Riva's arc finally comes full circle in this episode. She has the opportunity to unleash her anger on Luke, but she realizes that it is the same thing that Anakin did back at the Jedi Temple during Order 66. After realizing what she's doing, and with a little advice from Obi-Wan, Riva moves on from her trauma and looks like she'll begin to lead a new life, away from the Jedi and away from the Empire. Riva's future is very much up in the air at this point, and I'm not so sure that I'd want to see a series that focuses on a former Inquisitor living out her life, but I'd still be open to it if it happens. Moses Ingram did an excellent job giving life to the character in the series, and I definitely would not complain if she returned to give it another run and flesh out the character even more. There hasn't been anything that stood out to me about Feely's performance as young Luke, but I was glad we finally got to see both Owen and Beru in this episode. Their dynamic together has always been push and pull, and this episode stayed true to that. P.S. and Edgerton both have excellent performances in their short time in the series, and made the characters feel like we were truly in between where we saw them in Revenge of the Sith and A New Hope, with them being a little more defensive and cynical. All of the action with Luke running felt very chaotic to me and had a hard time holding my attention, but the conclusion that it all came to an end, with Obi-Wan finally getting to meet him, made Luke's involvement in the series worth it. Now that he's finally moved on from his past, Obi-Wan has accepted that he doesn't need to constantly be watching Luke to keep him safe. He trusts Owen and Beru to do that now. While I don't want to say that she carried the show, Blair's performance as young Princess Leia is what got me excited to watch every new episode. Especially in this episode, Blair's subtle facial movements add so much to the character's emotions, and it made the conversations with Obi-Wan hit so much harder than they would have otherwise. She's always been one of my favorite characters, but this series has added a completely new level of depth to her character. Similarly to The Path, I would have really liked to see more of Leia in this episode, but her story wasn't the one that needed to be focused on, and we still got a really nice conclusion to her and Obi-Wan's story at the end. It helped connect Leia's story more to A New Hope, and it showed all of the development that the characters went through. Bail and Breha are less strict of Leia and allow her to be herself more. She definitely would not have been allowed to wear the holster, gloves, and boots at the beginning of the series, and it shows that her parents have loosened up a little after everything that happened. Blair looks so much like a young Carrie Fisher and Princess Leia in the scene, and I loved Breha's reaction to the holster. While Vader and Obi-Wan's duel ripped my heart out, Leia's conclusion helped put it back together. Obi-Wan's short conversation with Leia at the end was heartwarming and saw the first time that he laughed in the series. Not just a smirk or chuckle, but a full-out laugh. After his duel with Vader, Obi-Wan has moved on and become a new man, one who isn't as grim or somber as the one we saw in the first episode. We also saw Leia fully accept her place as an Organa. Not only was she willing to meet whatever family or politicians came off the shuttle without a fuss, she seemed to accept Bail and Breha as her parents. Obi-Wan was telling her about the qualities that she gets from Padme and Anakin, but when she tells her that he wishes he could tell her more, she's okay with it and looks to Bail and Breha, seeming to accept that this is her home now, no matter who her parents were. It's a nice conclusion to the scenes in the beginning of the series, with Bail and her cousin, where she feels as though she doesn't belong. While I think that it's unlikely that we will ever see a young Leia again in live action, I would love for Blair to reappear again as the character in a story that makes sense. She entered the role of a legacy character, and was able to add so much more depth and emotion to the character. She was the perfect casting for the role, and I'd like to think that Carrie Fisher would have been proud of her. The series finale is packed full of action and emotion that provides a satisfying end to the story, earning a perfect rating of 10 out of 10. Make sure to like, subscribe, follow me on social media, and comment down below what content you'd like to see in the future. As always, thank you all for watching, and remember,
the Force will be with you, always.